Jimin nearly reveals a secret he's hidden for years, but Jungkook becomes determined to uncover the truth behind his silence. Jungkook, if you love me, stop asking what happened that night. Jimin's voice cracked through the dark studio just as the glass in his trembling hand slipped and shattered against the floor. For 3 seconds, neither Jimin nor Jungkook moved. The room smelled of rain, dust, and the faint coffee Jimin had forgotten beside the piano hours ago. Outside the tall windows, lightning briefly illuminated the city, turning Jimin's pale face into something almost ghost-like. Jungkook stared at him, breathing slowly, his eyes fixed on the strange fear hiding behind Jimin's expression. "What happened that night?" Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin immediately looked away. That single movement told Jungkook more than any confession could have. For years, Jimin had always been the person who could smile through pain, joke through exhaustion, and turn every uncomfortable question into something harmless. But tonight, Jimin had almost said something enormous. Something that had been locked inside him for years. Jungkook stepped carefully over the broken glass. "You almost told me." "No, Jimin." "I said no." Jimin's voice rose, but his hands betrayed him. His fingers were shaking. Jungkook had known Jimin long enough to recognize every tiny habit. The way Jimin rubbed his thumb against his index finger when anxious. The way Jimin pressed his lips together when hiding something. The way Jimin avoided eye contact whenever a memory became too painful. Tonight, Jimin was doing all three. Jungkook stopped only a few feet away. "You said my name that night." Jimin froze. The rain hammered harder against the windows. "I heard you," Jungkook continued. "You were standing outside the hospital room. You thought I was unconscious." Jimin's face lost its color. "Jungkook, you don't remember that. I remember your voice. You were barely awake. I remember you crying." Silence swallowed the studio. Jimin closed his eyes. He had spent years convincing himself that memory could be buried if he never gave it a name. He had changed apartments, destroyed photographs, deleted messages, and avoided the old hospital whenever possible. He had even trained himself to smile whenever Jungkook mentioned that night, but memories did not disappear. They waited. And tonight, Jungkook had finally touched the door Jimin had spent years guarding. "Why were you crying?" Jungkook asked. Jimin swallowed hard. "Because I thought I was going to lose you. That isn't the whole truth. It is enough." "No, Jimin, it isn't." Jungkook's voice remained gentle, but there was something beneath it now, a determination Jimin had never heard before. Jimin turned toward the piano and placed both palms against its polished surface. "Some truths don't make anything better." "Maybe not." Jungkook stepped closer. "But lies don't make anything better either." Jimin stared at the black and white keys. He remembered another night, years ago, when those same fingers had trembled over a piano while Jungkook slept in a hospital bed nearby. He remembered the smell of antiseptic, the cold hallway, the red emergency light above the operating room door. Most of all, he remembered the envelope he had never shown Jungkook, the envelope that contained a truth capable of changing everything between them. "Jimin," Jungkook whispered. Jimin slowly turned around. For one fragile moment, Jungkook thought Jimin might finally speak. Instead, Jimin reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small silver key. Jungkook's eyes immediately dropped to it. "What's that?" Jimin's fingers closed around the key. "Nothing." Jungkook almost laughed, but there was no humor in his expression. "You just pulled a key out of your jacket after telling me there are things you can't tell me, and you're calling it nothing." Jimin looked down. "Please, Jungkook. Where does it go?" "It doesn't matter." "Then why have you kept it for years?" Jimin's breathing became uneven. Jungkook saw the answer in his face before Jimin could hide it. "You know where it goes," Jungkook said. Jimin said nothing. "And you've been there recently." Jimin's eyes widened. That was the moment Jungkook understood that the secret wasn't simply old. It was still alive. Whatever Jimin had hidden had not remained buried in the past. Someone or something was still connected to it. Jungkook reached toward Jimin's hand, but Jimin pulled away. "Don't. I'm not trying to hurt you. I know. Then let me help." Jimin's eyes filled with tears, but he refused to let them fall. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." Jungkook stared at him. "Why?" Jimin looked toward the rain-covered window. "Because if you find out everything, you may never look at me the same way again." Jungkook's expression softened. "Jimin, I've seen you at your worst. Not this." "Then show me." Jimin shook his head. "I can't." "You almost did." "Almost doesn't count." Jungkook moved closer until only a breath separated them. "It counts to me." Jimin finally looked into Jungkook's eyes. For years, that gaze had been his safest place. Tonight, it was terrifying because Jungkook wasn't angry. He wasn't accusing him. He was simply asking for the truth, and Jimin knew that was far more difficult to resist. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Jimin slowly opened his fist. The silver key rested in his palm, cold and bright beneath the studio lights. "There is a room," Jimin whispered. "A room nobody knows about." Jungkook's heartbeat quickened. "Where?" Jimin hesitated. "Under the old theater." Jungkook's expression changed. The old theater had been abandoned for years after the fire that had nearly destroyed it. Jimin had never spoken about the place, not once. "Why would you have a key to a room under there?" Jungkook asked. Jimin's lips trembled. "Because I left something there." "What?" Jimin looked at him for a long moment. "Something that belongs to you." Jungkook stopped breathing for a second. "To me." Jimin nodded. "And something that belongs to me." The words hung between them. Jungkook glanced at the key again. "Take me there." "No, Jimin, not tonight." "Why?" Jimin's eyes shifted toward the dark hallway behind Jungkook. "Because I think someone knows we've been talking about it." Jungkook immediately turned. The hallway was empty. The studio door was still locked, yet the faint sound of footsteps seemed to echo somewhere beyond the walls. Jimin's face tightened with fear. Jungkook moved instinctively in front of him. "Did you hear that?" Jimin nodded. Another sound followed, 3 slow knocks from somewhere inside the building. Jimin gripped Jungkook's sleeve. "Don't open the door." Jungkook looked at him. "Why?" Jimin's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because the last time someone knocked like that, my entire life changed." A third knock came again, slow and deliberate, and Jimin's fingers tightened around Jungkook's sleeve as if letting go would make the darkness outside swallow him whole. Jungkook could feel the tremor running through Jimin's hand. "Jimin," Jungkook whispered, "who is it?" Jimin didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the studio door, his breathing shallow and uneven. Another knock. This time a voice followed. "Jimin!" Jimin's entire body stiffened. Jungkook looked at him sharply. "You know that voice?" Jimin nodded once. "I haven't heard it in years. Who is it?" "Someone who should be dead." Jungkook's expression hardened. "That's impossible." "I know." The handle slowly moved. Jungkook stepped between Jimin and the door. "Stay behind me." "Jungkook, don't. You said someone might know. I'm not letting you face them alone." Jimin's eyes filled with fear. "You don't understand." "Then explain it." "I can't. You always say that." Jungkook's voice was quiet, but the hurt beneath it was impossible to hide. "You keep saying you can't, Jimin. Every time I get close to the truth, you push me away." Jimin lowered his gaze. "Because I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" "From me." Before Jungkook could respond, the handle stopped moving. Silence returned. Then something slid underneath the door. A thin black envelope landed on the floor. Jimin stared at it as though it were a weapon. Jungkook slowly bent down and picked it up. "Don't open it," Jimin said. "Why?" "Because I already know what's inside." Jungkook turned the envelope over. There was no name, no address, only a small silver symbol pressed into the wax seal. Jimin saw it and immediately covered his mouth. "That's the same symbol." "The same as what?" Jungkook asked. Jimin shook his head. "Forget it." Jungkook looked at him. "No." He tore open the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Jimin standing outside the old theater years ago, his face turned toward someone hidden in the shadows. Jungkook stared at the image. "Who took this?" Jimin whispered. "I don't know." Beneath the photograph was a handwritten sentence. "You would never tell him." Jungkook's eyes slowly lifted toward Jimin. "Tell me what you promised." Jimin's lips parted, but no words came. Jungkook took another step toward him. "Jimin," Jimin finally whispered, "I promised I would keep you alive." Jungkook froze. "What does that mean?" Jimin looked toward the locked door. "Years ago, before you knew what was happening, someone threatened you." Jungkook's face changed. "Why don't I remember?" "Because I made sure you wouldn't." "How?" "I lied." Jungkook stared at him, stunned. "You lied about everything." "Not everything." Jimin's eyes glistened. "Only the parts that could have gotten you hurt." Jungkook looked down at the photograph again. "And the theater?" Jimin nodded slowly. "That's where it began." "What happened there?" Jimin's voice trembled. "I met someone who knew something about your family." Jungkook's expression became confused. "My family? They knew things I wasn't supposed to know." "What things?" Jimin hesitated. "The reason you were targeted." Jungkook's heart pounded. "Targeted by who?" Jimin didn't answer. "Jimin, I don't know their name." "You're lying." "I wish I were." Jungkook stepped closer. "Then tell me what you do know." Jimin looked down at the silver key. "The person who gave me this key told me that if I ever opened that room, I would lose the one person I loved most." Jungkook's breath caught. "And you believed them?" "I had no choice." "You always had a choice." "No, Jungkook," Jimin's voice broke. "I had you." Silence filled the room. Jungkook's anger disappeared for a moment. He could see how exhausted Jimin looked, as if carrying the secret had slowly consumed him from the inside. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jungkook asked. Jimin swallowed. "Because every time I tried, something happened." "What?" "The first time I received a photograph of your car." Jungkook's face went pale. "The second time someone followed you home." Jungkook stared at him. "And the third?" Jimin closed his eyes. "Someone left your hospital bracelet outside my apartment." Jungkook looked at Jimin as though seeing him for the first time. "You carried all of that alone." Jimin nodded. "I thought if I became the person you hated, you'd stay away from me." "That's why you pushed me away." "Yes, that's why you disappeared." "Yes, that's why you acted like you didn't care." Jimin's tears finally fell. "Yes," Jungkook's voice cracked. "Jimin, I spent years thinking I wasn't enough." Jimin looked at him helplessly. "You were everything." "Then why didn't you trust me?" Jimin slowly reached for Jungkook's hand. "Because I trusted you more than I trusted myself." Jungkook closed his eyes. The words hurt more than any accusation could have. Before either of them could say anything else, the studio lights flickered. Once, twice. Then everything went dark. Jimin immediately grabbed Jungkook's arm. "Don't move." A metallic sound echoed from the hallway. Something had entered the building. Jungkook reached for his phone, but Jimin whispered, "No lights." They stood together in darkness, listening. Footsteps approached. One step, then another, then another. They stopped directly outside the studio. Jungkook could hear Jimin's heartbeat against his shoulder. The door handle moved again. This time the lock clicked. Jimin's grip tightened. "Jungkook," he whispered, "if that door opens, don't let them take the key." The door slowly opened. A figure stood in the darkness. Jimin stopped breathing. Jungkook stared at the stranger. Then the figure spoke one sentence that made Jimin's knees nearly give way. "You should have told Jungkook the truth 5 years ago." Jimin's face went white. Jungkook turned toward him. 5 years ago." The stranger stepped into the faint emergency light. Jimin whispered a name he had sworn never to say again. "Minyu." Jungkook stared at the man. Jimin had told him Minyu was dead, but the man standing before them was very much alive. "Jimin," Minyu said calmly, "the room beneath the theater has already been opened." Jimin's eyes widened. "That's impossible." Minyu smiled without warmth. "Then you should ask Jungkook why his name was written inside." "Jungkook's name was inside the room," Jungkook repeated, staring at Minyu as if the sentence itself had changed the temperature of the studio. Jimin moved instinctively toward Jungkook, but Jungkook lifted a hand, stopping him. "No more secrets," Jungkook said quietly. "Not tonight." Minyu's gaze shifted between them. "You still don't understand what Jimin sacrificed for you." "Then explain it." Minyu smiled faintly. "Ask Jimin." Jimin's jaw tightened. "Don't." "You have spent 5 years protecting him with half-truths." Minyu took another step forward. "You told him the theater was abandoned. You told him the fire was an accident. You told him the person behind it disappeared." Minyu looked directly at Jungkook. "None of those things were true." Jungkook turned toward Jimin. "Tell me." Jimin's eyes lowered. "The fire wasn't an accident." The words were barely audible. Jungkook stared at him. "What happened?" Jimin took a shaky breath. "One wanted something that was hidden beneath the theater. They knew you were connected to it, even though you didn't know why." "Connected how?" "Your name was on a document." "What document?" Jimin's hands trembled. "A document that disappeared after the fire." Jungkook looked at Minyu. "And you know where it is?" "I know where the people who stole it are." Minyu reached into his coat and placed another photograph on the piano. "But I didn't come here to talk about the document." Jimin's eyes widened. "Then why are you here?" Minyu looked at him. "Because they know you still have the key." Jimin instinctively closed his fist around the silver key. Jungkook noticed. "Who are they?" Minyu's expression became serious. "People who believe the secret belongs to them." "What secret?" Jungkook asked. Minyu looked at Jimin. "The one he has been carrying since the night you almost died." Jungkook's face tightened. "I didn't almost die because of an accident, did I?" Jimin closed his eyes. "No." The answer came so quietly that Jungkook almost wished he hadn't heard it. "Then why?" Jimin looked at him, tears shining in his eyes. "Because someone tried to make sure you would never remember what you saw." Jungkook's stomach tightened. "What did I see?" Jimin hesitated. "You saw someone leaving the theater." "Who?" "Your father." Jungkook went completely still. The room seemed to lose every sound except the rain. "My father," Jimin nodded. "You were there that night." "Why don't I remember?" "Because you hit your head when the fire started." "And you?" Jimin looked away. "I found you." Jungkook's voice softened. "You saved me." "I tried." "You did." Jimin shook his head. "No, I didn't save you completely." Jungkook frowned. "What does that mean?" Jimin reached into his jacket again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He stared at it for several seconds before handing it to Jungkook. I wrote this the morning after the fire. Jungkook unfolded it. His eyes moved across the faded handwriting. His expression changed almost immediately. This is my handwriting. Yes, but I don't remember writing it, Jimin nodded. Because you wrote it before the doctors erased the memory. Jungkook looked up sharply. Doctors can't erase memories. Not deliberately, Minyu said, but trauma can. Jimin continued softly. You wrote one sentence before you lost consciousness. Jungkook looked down. The sentence was short. Jimin knows the truth. Let HIM tell you. Jungkook's hands began to shake. Why would I write that? Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Because you knew someone was watching. Jungkook stared at him. Then why did you keep this? Because I thought someday you'd be ready. And am I? Jimin looked at Jungkook for a long moment. I don't know. Jungkook folded the paper carefully. I am. Jimin's lips trembled. Jungkook, no. Jungkook stepped closer. You don't get to decide what I can handle anymore. Jimin looked wounded, but he didn't move away. Jungkook lowered his voice. You spent years protecting me by making decisions for me. Maybe you thought you were saving me, but you also took away my right to know my own life. Jimin looked down. I know. Do you? Jungkook asked. Because I lost years wondering why you stopped looking at me the way you used to. Jimin's eyes closed. I never stopped. Then look at me now. Jimin did. Jungkook's expression softened. I'm still here. Jimin's tears fell silently. Minyu watched them for several seconds before speaking. If you want answers, you need to go to the theater tonight. Jimin immediately shook his head. No, it's already too late. No, Minyu, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Minyu pointed toward the silver key. They are searching for it. Who? Jungkook asked. Minyu hesitated. The same person who sent the envelope. Jimin's face tightened. How do you know? Because I received one too. Minyu pulled a black envelope from his coat. Mine contained your photograph. Jimin stared at it. What photograph? Minyu opened the envelope and showed them. It was an old picture of Jimin sleeping beside Jungkook's hospital bed. On the back, someone had written, he chose you over the truth. Jungkook slowly looked at Jimin. What did you choose? Jimin's lips parted. You. Over what? Over everything. Jimin, I was given a choice. Jimin's voice cracked. Tell them where the document was or let them come after you. Jungkook stared at him. And you chose me. Every time. Jungkook stepped forward and pulled Jimin into his arms. Jimin stiffened, then collapsed against him, burying his face against Jungkook's shoulder. For years, Jimin had carried the weight alone. Now, for the first time, he allowed someone else to hold part of it. Jungkook closed his eyes and whispered, You should have let me carry it with you. Jimin's fingers clutched the back of Jungkook's jacket. I was afraid. I know. I thought if you knew, you would leave. I won't. You don't know everything yet. Then tell me. Jimin slowly pulled away. His eyes were red, but his expression had changed. Fear remained, but beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. Then we go to the theater. Minyu nodded. Together. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Once we enter, there may be no going back. Jungkook took the silver key from Jimin's palm and closed Jimin's fingers around it again. Then we don't go back. The three of them left the studio minutes later. Rain covered the streets, reflecting neon lights across the pavement like broken pieces of glass. Jimin walked beside Jungkook without speaking. Every few seconds, Jungkook glanced at Jimin as if trying to memorize him all over again. When they finally reached the old theater, the building stood beneath the storm like a forgotten monument. Its windows were shattered. Vines crawled across the walls. The smell of wet stone and smoke lingered in the air even after all those years. Jimin stopped at the entrance. This is where I found you. Jungkook looked at him. And this is where I lost part of myself. Jimin nodded. Maybe tonight we find it. They entered. Their footsteps echoed through the abandoned hall. Dust floated through the beams of their flashlights. Somewhere above them, metal creaked. Minyu led them toward a narrow staircase hidden behind the stage. At the bottom was an iron door. Jimin stood before it, staring at the lock. His hand shook as he inserted the silver key. Jimin, Jungkook whispered. Jimin looked back. What? Whatever is behind that door, you don't face it alone. Jimin gave him the smallest smile. I know. The key turned. The lock clicked. The door opened slowly, releasing a cold breath of air that smelled of old paper, rust, and something strangely familiar. Jungkook raised his flashlight. Along the walls were dozens of photographs. Jimin's breath caught. Every photograph showed Jungkook at different moments of his life. His first apartment, his workplace, his hospital room, even moments Jungkook had believed were completely private. Jungkook stared in horror. Someone has been watching me for years. Jimin stepped closer, his face drained of color. Then his flashlight moved across the far wall. One final photograph was pinned there. It showed Jimin and Jungkook standing together outside the hospital 5 years earlier. Beneath it were 4 words written in black ink. He still doesn't know. Jimin stopped breathing. Jungkook looked at him. Know what? Jimin's eyes fixed on the photograph. His lips trembled. The part I never told you. The part you never told me. Jungkook's voice echoed through the underground room, and Jimin felt the words strike harder than the cold air pressing against his skin. Jimin stared at the photograph on the wall, unable to answer. The picture showed Jungkook standing beside him 5 years earlier, both of them unaware that someone had been watching from the shadows. But it wasn't the photograph that frightened Jimin most. It was the handwriting beneath it. Jimin knew that handwriting. Jimin, Jungkook said again, what don't I know? Jimin slowly reached toward the photograph, but Jungkook caught his wrist. Don't touch it. Jimin looked at him. Why? Because every time you touch something connected to that night, you remember something you don't want to tell me. Jimin's expression tightened. You're learning my habits too quickly. I've been watching you for years. Jimin's eyes softened. I know. Then tell me. Jimin looked down at their hands. Jungkook was still holding his wrist, not tightly, but firmly enough to remind Jimin that he wasn't alone anymore. 5 years ago, Jimin whispered, before the fire I received a message. From whom? Someone who knew your name. What did they say? They told me you were in danger. Jungkook's jaw tightened. And you believed them. They knew things nobody else could know. Like what? Your favorite childhood hiding place, the scar on your shoulder, the song your mother used to sing when you couldn't sleep. Jungkook went silent. Jimin continued, they knew things about you that weren't public. So you met them? Yes, here, yes. Alone, Jimin nodded. I thought I could handle it. Jungkook looked away, anger and fear fighting across his face. You always thought you could handle everything. I had to. No, Jimin, you chose to. Jimin's lips parted, but Jungkook wasn't finished. You chose to carry every fear alone. You chose to lie to me. You chose to disappear whenever you thought I was getting too close. Jimin lowered his head. You're right. Jungkook's anger softened. I don't want to be right. Jimin looked at him. Then what do you want? Jungkook stepped closer. You. Jimin's eyes filled with tears, even after everything. Especially after everything. Jimin turned away quickly, pressing his fingers against his lips. He didn't want Jungkook to see how deeply those words affected him. But Jungkook already knew. He always knew. Minyu suddenly interrupted. We don't have much time. Both men turned. Minyu was examining a metal cabinet at the far end of the room. What are you looking for? Jungkook asked. The document. You said it was gone. I said it disappeared. Minyu opened the cabinet. Inside were dozens of files, each marked with a date. Jimin approached cautiously. Those weren't here before. Minyu looked at him. You haven't been here for 5 years. Exactly. Jimin's eyes narrowed. Someone has been using this place. Jungkook examined the files. These aren't just about me. He pulled one out. They're about you too, Jimin. Jimin froze. Give it to me. Jungkook opened it before Jimin could stop him. Inside were photographs of Jimin at different ages, handwritten notes about his routines, his fears, his friendships, even his favorite places to eat. Jungkook's expression darkened. They've been following you too. Jimin stared at the pages. I thought they were only watching you. You were wrong. Minyu opened another file. They were watching both of you. Jimin's eyes moved across a page. One sentence immediately caught his attention. Jimin is the key to Junkook's memory. Jimin's breathing stopped. No. Jungkook read it over his shoulder. What does that mean? Jimin shook his head. I don't know. Minyu's expression changed. You do. No, Jimin. I said I don't know. Minyu stepped closer. You remember. Jimin backed away. Stop. You remember the conversation you had with the doctor. Jungkook turned sharply. What doctor? Jimin looked at Minyu with betrayal in his eyes. Why would you say that? Because Jungkook deserves to know. Not like this. Then tell him yourself. Jungkook's voice was quiet. What doctor? Jimin closed his eyes. He remembered the hospital corridor, the white lights, the smell of disinfectant, a doctor standing beside him and speaking in a low voice. If Jungkook remembers everything, he may become unstable. Jimin had been 17 kinds of terrified that morning. The doctor had given him a choice. Let Jungkook recover naturally and risk him remembering the fire, or sign a consent form allowing the hospital to keep certain records restricted until Jungkook was emotionally stable. Jimin had signed, but there had been another document, one he had never told Jungkook about. Jimin, Jungkook's voice brought him back. I signed something. What? A medical consent form. Jungkook frowned. Why? Because the doctors thought your memories could hurt you. And you agreed. I was scared. What exactly did you agree to? Jimin looked at the floor. Would not tell you everything immediately. Jungkook stared at him. You helped them hide my memories. Jimin nodded. Yes. The silence that followed was devastating. Jungkook stepped backward. Jimin wanted to reach for him but stopped himself. I didn't erase anything, Jimin whispered. I swear I couldn't do that. Jungkook's eyes were filled with pain. But you helped keep me from knowing. Because I thought I was protecting you. And now, Jimin swallowed, now I know I was wrong. Jungkook looked away. For a moment, Jimin feared the silence more than anger. Then Jungkook spoke. I don't blame you for being afraid. Jimin looked up. What? I blame you for deciding that I wasn't strong enough to know the truth. Jimin's tears fell. I'm sorry. Jungkook rubbed his forehead and took a slow breath. I need a minute. Jimin nodded. Take all the time you need. Jungkook walked toward the far wall. His flashlight swept across a series of photographs until it stopped on one picture. Jungkook stared at it. Jimin, something in his voice made Jimin move closer. The photograph showed the hospital corridor 5 years earlier. Jimin was standing beside the doctor's office, but someone else was there. A man stood behind Jimin. The image was blurry, but his face was unmistakable. Jungkook stared at the photograph. That's my father. Jimin's face went white. Yes, he was alive. Yes, you knew. Yes. Jungkook turned toward Jimin. Why didn't you tell me? Jimin couldn't answer. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. Why? Jimin finally whispered. Because your father asked me not to. He spoke to you. That morning. What did he say? Jimin's voice trembled. He told me that if I ever loved you, I would never tell you he survived. Jungkook stood completely still. Why? Jimin looked toward the photograph. Because he said he was trying to protect you from the people who were after him. And you believed him. I had no reason not to. Until now. Jimin nodded. Until now. Minyu suddenly looked toward the entrance. We need to leave. Jungkook frowned. Why? Minyu pointed toward the staircase. A faint red light blinked in the darkness. Motion sensor. Jimin's heart dropped. Someone is coming. Jungkook grabbed Jimin's hand. Then we're leaving together. They hurried toward the door. Behind them, footsteps began echoing through the underground corridor. One person, then another, then several more. Jimin looked back once and saw the metal cabinet standing open. One file remained inside. Its label was barely visible beneath the dust. Jungkook, original memory report. Jimin stopped. Wait. Jungkook pulled him forward. No time. Jungkook, that file will come back. What if we can't? Jungkook squeezed Jimin's hand. Then we make sure we can. They ran up the stairs as the underground room filled with footsteps. Jimin could hear someone shouting behind them. Don't let them reach the surface. Jungkook pushed open the theater exit. Cold rain hit their faces. They ran into the darkness. Only after several blocks did they stop. Jungkook leaned against a wall, breathing hard. Jimin stood beside him, soaked, trembling, and exhausted. Jungkook! What? I'm sorry. Jungkook looked at him. Stop apologizing. But you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Jimin's eyes softened. You really mean that? Jungkook nodded. Yes. He reached for Jimin's hand. But tomorrow we go back. Jimin's expression changed. Why? Because I need to know what happened to my memories. Jimin nodded slowly. Then his phone vibrated. He pulled it from his pocket. There was one new message from an unknown number. Jimin opened it. His blood turned cold. The message contained only a photograph of Jungkook and Jimin standing together in the rain. Beneath the photograph were 6 words. You found the wrong secret, Jimin. Jimin stared at the screen. Jungkook noticed his expression. What is it? Jimin slowly looked up. Someone has been watching us. Jungkook took the phone. His face hardened as he read the message. Then another message arrived. This one contained no photograph, only a sentence. The secret you're looking for is inside Jungkook. The secret is inside me, Jungkook whispered, staring at the message until the words seemed to blur beneath the rainwater dripping from his hair. Jimin reached for the phone, but Jungkook didn't give it back. What does that mean? Jungkook asked. I don't know, Jimin. I swear I don't. Jungkook studied his face. For the first time, Jimin looked genuinely confused rather than frightened, and somehow that frightened Jungkook even more. The rain continued falling around them, washing the streets in silver reflections. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and disappeared into the night. Let's go somewhere safe, Jimin said. Jungkook nodded. They returned to Jimin's apartment just before dawn. The place was silent except for the ticking clock in the kitchen. Jimin changed into dry clothes while Jungkook sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the silver key on the table. He had seen it so many times over the years without ever knowing what it meant. Now it seemed to represent every question Jimin had refused to answer. Jimin came back carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one in front of Jungkook and sat across from him. "You always make tea when you're nervous," Jungkook said. Jimin gave a tired smile. "You always notice." "I notice everything about you." The smile disappeared from Jimin's face. Jungkook leaned forward. "That's why I know when you're lying." Jimin lowered his eyes. "I'm not lying now. Then tell me what you remember about the hospital." Jimin held the warm cup between his palms. "I remember sitting beside you. Anything else? The doctor told me your memory might return gradually. And he told me not to force it." Jungkook frowned. "Why? Because your brain was trying to protect you from something traumatic. Something I saw at the theater." Jimin nodded. "Yes, my father." Another nod. "And someone else." Jimin looked up sharply. "What makes you think that?" Jungkook touched his temple. "Because I have fragments." Jimin's breathing stopped. "What kind?" "A red door." Jimin went still. "A voice." "Whose? I don't know." "What did the voice say?" Jungkook closed his eyes. "It kept repeating one sentence." Jimin leaned closer. "What sentence?" Jungkook opened his eyes. "Don't trust the boy beside you." Jimin's face drained of color. "What?" "That's what I heard." Jimin slowly stood. "No, Jimin." "No, no, no." He began packing across the room. "That wasn't supposed to happen." Jungkook stood too. "What wasn't supposed to happen?" "Your memory returning." "Why?" Jimin looked at him. "Because whoever wanted you to forget knew that if you remembered me, you'd remember everything else." Jungkook stared at him. "Maybe that's why they keep saying the secret is inside me." Jimin nodded. "Maybe." Jungkook walked toward the window. The sky outside was beginning to turn gray. "What if the memory isn't something someone hid?" "What do you mean?" "What if I hid it myself?" Jimin stared at him. "You were unconscious. Before that." Jungkook touched his temple again. "Maybe I saw something so terrible that I chose not to remember it." Jimin's expression softened. "You were only trying to survive. And you were trying to protect me." "Yes. But from what?" Jimin looked away. "From the truth about your father." Jungkook turned. "What was he doing at the theater?" Jimin hesitated. "He wasn't there because of the fire." "Then why?" "He was meeting someone." "Who?" Jimin's lips parted. "Your father was trying to hand over the document." Jungkook frowned. "To whom?" "To someone he trusted." "Who?" Jimin shook his head. "I never saw their face." "But you know something." "I know your father gave them something." "The document." "Yes." Jungkook sat down again. "And then the fire started." "Yes." "Who started it?" Jimin looked at him. "Your father." Jungkook froze. "My father. He started the fire himself." "Why?" "To destroy the evidence." Jungkook stared at Jimin in disbelief. "But he was trying to protect me. He believed the evidence could be used against you." "Against me for what?" Jimin's eyes filled with tears. "That's the part I never understood." Jungkook was silent. Then he noticed something on the coffee table, a small black box he had never seen before. "What's that?" Jimin followed his gaze. His entire expression changed. "Where did you get that?" "It was here when I arrived." Jimin approached slowly. "I didn't put it there." Jungkook opened the box. Inside was an old cassette tape and a handwritten note. Jimin recognized the handwriting immediately. "That's my father's." Jungkook picked up the note. "Read it." Jimin hesitated. "Jimin, if you're reading this, then I failed to protect my son." Jungkook's fingers tightened around the paper. Jimin continued reading aloud. "The truth was never meant to reach Jungkook through me. It had to reach him through you." Jimin's voice broke. Jungkook looked at him. "Through you," Jimin continued. "You are the only person he trusts enough to believe when everyone else lies." Jimin stopped reading. "There's more." Jungkook nodded. Jimin swallowed and continued. "If Jungkook remembers the theater, he will remember why I left, but he will also remember who betrayed me." Jungkook looked up. "Who betrayed him?" Jimin slowly shook his head. "I don't know." "There's a tape." Jungkook held up the cassette. "We need to listen." Jimin found an old player in a drawer. His hands shook as he inserted the tape. Static filled the apartment, then a man's voice emerged. Jungkook immediately recognized it. His face changed. "Dad." The recording was faint. "Jimin, if you are hearing this, I need you to listen carefully. Don't trust anyone who tells you the fire was an accident. It wasn't." Jimin stared at Jungkook. The voice continued. "Someone inside our family betrayed me. I don't know who, but I know they want the document." Static crackled. "The document contains the original agreement. It proves that Jungkook was never supposed to be involved." Jungkook's eyes widened. "Involved in what?" The recording continued. "If they discover that Jungkook knows about the agreement, they will use him to reach me." Jimin covered his mouth. Then the voice became softer. If I disappear, tell Jungkook I loved him. Tape crackled again. And Jimin's eyes widened. Yes, the recorded voice continued. You were never the reason he was in danger, you were the reason he survived. The tape stopped. Silence filled the apartment. Jungkook slowly turned toward Jimin. Tears were running down Jimin's face. You heard that, Jungkook whispered. Jimin nodded. All these years. Jungkook stood and walked toward him. You thought you were responsible for what happened. I did, but my father said you saved me. Jimin nodded. Jungkook reached out and gently wiped a tear from Jimin's cheek. Then why did you keep believing you had to suffer alone? Jimin closed his eyes. Because saving you became the only thing I knew how to do. Jungkook pulled him into a tight embrace. Jimin's hands slowly wrapped around Jungkook's back. For several moments, neither spoke. There was no mystery in that embrace, no hidden message, no threat waiting behind a door. There were only two people exhausted from years of fear finally allowing themselves to breathe. Then the cassette player clicked. Both of them froze. The tape had started playing again by itself. A second recording emerged beneath the static. This time it wasn't Jimin's father speaking. It was a younger Jimin. His voice was trembling. Jungkook, if you ever hear this, I'm sorry. Jungkook slowly released Jimin. That's your voice. Jimin stared at the cassette player. I never recorded that. The younger Jimin continued. There is something I never told you, something I promised I would take to my grave. Jungkook's heartbeat accelerated. Jimin's face went completely pale. The recording continued. The night of the fire, I wasn't alone with you. Static interrupted the sentence. Then Jimin's younger voice returned, barely audible. There was another person in the room. Jungkook stared at Jimin. Who? The recording went silent for several seconds, then came the answer. It was Jungkook. Jimin stopped breathing. Jungkook stared at the cassette player. What? The tape clicked off. Neither of them moved. Then Jungkook whispered, Jimin, if I was already inside the room, why don't I remember being there? Jimin looked at him, terrified by a realization that had been buried even deeper than the secret itself. Because Jungkook, Jimin whispered, you weren't unconscious when the fire started. Jimin's words seemed to remain suspended in the apartment, heavier than the storm clouds gathering beyond the windows. Jungkook stared at Jimin without blinking. Then what was I doing? Jimin couldn't answer immediately. He looked toward the cassette player, then toward the silver key resting on the table. His fingers began rubbing against each other, an old nervous habit Jungkook had learned to recognize years ago. Jimin, you were awake. I know that now. No, Jimin shook his head. You don't understand, you weren't just awake. Jungkook's stomach tightened. What was I doing? Jimin slowly sat down. You were trying to stop the fire. Jungkook's breathing changed. By yourself. No, Jimin looked at him. With me. Jungkook's eyes widened. You and me. Jimin nodded. We were both inside that room. Then why did everyone say I was found unconscious outside? Because that's what I told them. Why? Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Because I had to make them believe you remembered nothing. Jungkook stood motionless. What did I see? Your father. I know that. No, Jungkook, you saw him arguing with someone. Who? Jimin looked away. Someone you knew. Jungkook felt a strange pressure behind his eyes. A fragment appeared, a hallway, a red door, his father's voice, another man's silhouette. Then Jimin shouting his name. He pressed his fingers against his temple. I remember something. Jimin immediately stood. What? One was holding your arm. Jimin froze. What else? You were trying to pull away. Jimin's eyes widened. What else? Jungkook closed his eyes. My father said you promised. Jimin's breathing stopped. Then someone said he'll never know. Jimin stepped backward. That's it. That's what? That's the conversation. Jungkook opened his eyes. You heard it too. Yes. Who was the person? Jimin shook his head. I never saw his face. Jungkook stared at him. But I did. Jimin's heart pounded. You remember. Not his face. Jungkook touched his forehead. But his voice. What did he say? Jungkook swallowed. He called you by your full name. Jimin went pale. Nobody there knew my full name. Someone did. Who? Jungkook looked at the cassette player. Maybe the tape knows. Jimin immediately picked it up and examined it. This isn't an ordinary cassette. What do you mean? Look. He turned it over. There was a tiny inscription engraved into the plastic, a series of numbers. Jungkook stared at them. That's a date. Jimin nodded. The day after the fire. Someone recorded this afterward. Yes, Jungkook's eyes narrowed. Then why does the recording sound like your younger voice? Jimin didn't answer. He took a slow breath. Because it is my voice. But you said you never recorded it. I didn't. A cold silence settled between them. Jungkook suddenly understood. Someone recorded you without your knowledge. Yes, and they kept the tape. For 5 years. Jungkook looked at the black box. Why give it to us now? Jimin's expression hardened. Because they want us to remember. Or they want us to believe something. Jimin nodded. Exactly. Jungkook picked up the silver key. Then we need to find the original room. Jimin looked at him. We already did. No, Jungkook held up the key. The room beneath the theater wasn't the room from the recording. Jimin stared at the key. How do you know? Because you said this key opens a room. Yes. But when we opened the underground room, there was no red door. Jimin's eyes widened. He remembered. A red door had always been part of the memory. He had seen it in his nightmares for years. You're right. So where is it? Jimin looked at the silver key. I don't know. Jungkook turned the key over. There was something etched into its side, a tiny symbol shaped like a crescent moon. Jimin recognized it instantly. The old train station. Jungkook frowned. What? That symbol belonged to a storage facility beneath the old train station. How do you know? My father showed it to me once. Why? Jimin's expression darkened. He told me never to go there. Jungkook gave a faint, humorless smile. Of course he did. Jungkook, we're going. It could be dangerous. Everything about this has been dangerous. Jimin stared at him. You're not afraid. Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. I am. Then why are you going? Because I'm more afraid of losing you without ever knowing why. Jimin's lips trembled. You always know what to say. No, Jungkook smiled sadly. I just finally stopped being afraid of saying it. They left before sunrise. The old train station stood at the edge of the city, abandoned after a new line was built. Rusted signs hung from cracked walls and weeds grew between the tracks. The air smelled of wet iron and earth. Jimin walked beside Jungkook, holding the key tightly. You used to come here. Jungkook asked, once. With your father? No. Then with whom? Jimin stopped. Minyu. Jungkook turned. You and Minyu were here. Yes. Why? He helped me find the theater. Jungkook stared at him. You've known Minyu longer than you told me. Jimin sighed. Yes. How long? Since before the fire. Jungkook looked hurt. Another secret. I know, Jimin, I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. Jungkook reached for Jimin's hand. Just don't hide anything else. Jimin nodded. I won't. They descended a narrow staircase beneath the station. The walls were covered in faded graffiti. At the bottom stood a steel door. Jimin inserted the silver key. The lock clicked immediately. Behind the door was a narrow corridor illuminated by old red emergency lamps. Jungkook stopped. The red door. Jimin nodded. Yes, they walked slowly. At the end of the corridor stood a red door exactly like the one from Jungkook's fragmented memory. Jimin reached for the handle. Wait! Jungkook stopped him. What? Listen. They stood silently. From behind the door came the faint sound of music, a piano melody. Jimin's eyes widened. That's impossible. What? That's the song I wrote the night of the fire. Jungkook looked at him. You never released it. I never played it for anyone. The melody continued. Jimin's face became pale. Someone has been waiting for us. Jungkook placed his hand over Jimin's. Then we opened the door together. Jimin nodded. They turned the handle. The door opened. Inside was a small room filled with photographs, old recordings, and boxes. At the center stood a piano. On the piano was a single sheet of music. Jimin approached slowly. His hands trembled when he recognized the handwriting. That's mine. Jungkook looked over his shoulder. What does it say? Jimin read the title. The Promise. Beneath the title was a dedication. To Jungkook, if I ever forget why I chose you. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. You wrote this for me. Jimin nodded. I don't remember writing that line. Jungkook touched the paper. Maybe you didn't. Jimin looked at him. What do you mean? Jungkook pointed to the bottom of the page. There was another line written in darker ink. This handwriting isn't yours. Jimin stared at it. The sentence read, You didn't choose Jungkook. Jungkook chose you. Jimin's face changed. What does that mean? Before Jungkook could answer, a hidden speaker crackled to life. A distorted voice filled the room. You finally found it. Jimin stepped closer to Jungkook. Who are you? The voice laughed softly. You still don't recognize me. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. Show yourself. I don't need to. The speaker crackled again. Jimin already knows who I am. Jimin's breathing stopped. No, yes. The voice became clearer. Because I was there when Jungkook made the choice. Jungkook stared at Jimin. What choice? The voice answered before Jimin could speak. The choice to protect Jimin. Jimin's eyes widened. A memory suddenly crashed through him. The theater, the smoke, Jungkook standing in front of him, someone approaching with a weapon, Jungkook shouting, Take me instead. Jimin staggered backward. No, Jungkook caught him. Jimin, what happened? Jimin looked into Jungkook's eyes, terrified. You remembered before I did. Remembered what? Jimin whispered. You didn't forget the fire. The speaker crackled once more. Exactly. Then the voice said the one thing that made both of them freeze. Jungkook remembered everything. Jimin was the one who forgot. Jimin stared at Jungkook as the hidden speaker fell silent, the last words echoing inside the red room like a verdict neither of them was ready to accept. Jimin was the one who forgot. Jungkook slowly turned toward him. What did I forget? Jimin's lips parted, but no answer came. His mind was suddenly filled with fragments that didn't belong together, smoke curling beneath a ceiling, Jungkook's hand gripping his wrist, the metallic smell of blood, a piano melody playing somewhere in the distance, and a voice repeatedly telling him to run. Jimin pressed both hands against his temples. I remember the fire. Jungkook stepped closer. What do you remember? You were there. I know. You weren't unconscious. I know. Jimin's eyes widened. You were protecting me. Jungkook swallowed. I think so. And then, Jimin's voice trembled. You made me forget. Jungkook stared at him. I did what? Jimin looked around the room, desperate for something that could make sense of the impossible. The doctor said trauma could distort memories, but he stopped. But what? Jungkook asked. Jimin looked at him. I remember you telling me something. What? You said if I can't remember, make sure Jimin doesn't either. Jungkook's expression changed. I said that. Jimin nodded slowly. You were afraid. Of what? Of what would happen if we both remembered. The room fell silent. Jungkook walked toward the piano and touched the sheet music. Then maybe the secret wasn't something you were hiding from me. Jimin looked at him. Maybe you were hiding it from yourself. Jimin shook his head. I don't understand. Jungkook turned. Neither do I. The hidden speaker suddenly crackled again. You two keep looking in the wrong direction. Jungkook immediately looked toward the ceiling. Who are you? Someone who was there. Then come out. Not yet. Jimin's eyes narrowed. Why are you doing this? Because you both deserve to know what really happened. Then tell us. You aren't ready. Jungkook's expression hardened. Stop deciding that for us. The voice laughed softly. You sound exactly like your father. Jungkook froze. You knew my father. I knew him very well. Who are you? Silence. Then the speaker produced a recording. A familiar male voice filled the room. Jimin, if you're hearing this, don't trust anyone, not even me. Jimin's eyes widened. That's my voice. Yes, the hidden stranger replied, because you recorded it. I told you I don't remember. That's because the memory was removed. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Removed, not by a doctor, Jimin whispered. Then by whom? The speaker answered. By Jimin. Jimin stepped backward. No, you chose to forget. I would never. You did it to survive. Jimin's breathing became ragged. Jungkook moved beside him. What did he forget? The voice answered calmly. The moment he realized who betrayed him. Jimin closed his eyes. Suddenly a memory flashed through his mind, a hand placing the silver key in his palm, a man whispering, trust me. Another image followed, Jungkook lying on the floor, blood on his shirt, Jimin screaming his name, then a third image, Jimin holding a small recorder, his own voice saying, if I remember this, they'll come after him again. Jimin opened his eyes. I did it. Jungkook touched his shoulder. Did what? I recorded the message. Why? Because I knew I'd forget. Jungkook stared at him. You knew. Jimin nodded. I was afraid my own memory would betray me. So you left clues. Yes. Jimin looked at the piano. The key, the theater, the cassette, the song. Jungkook understood. You created a trail for yourself. I think so. Then the secret isn't only about what happened. No. Jimin looked directly at him. It's about who we were before we forgot. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. Were we? He couldn't finish the sentence. Jimin understood anyway. Yes. What? We were already protecting each other. Jungkook stepped closer. Jimin, you weren't just someone I wanted to save. Jimin's voice softened. You were the person I had promised to protect. Jungkook took Jimin's hand. And I promised to protect you. Jimin nodded. That's why they couldn't separate us. The hidden voice interrupted. You still don't know the most important part. Jimin looked toward the speaker. What? The person who betrayed you is still alive. Jungkook's expression hardened. Who? Someone you've trusted for years. Jimin's eyes widened. No, yes, Minyu, Jungkook asked. Silence followed. Jimin's face became pale. It can't be. You already suspect him. He saved us. Or he made sure you believed he did. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Do you trust Minyu? Jimin hesitated. That hesitation was enough. I don't know, the voice continued. Find the second key. Where? Where your father left his last message. Where is that? Inside the old apartment, Jungkook frowned. My childhood home. Yes, Jimin's expression changed. Nobody has lived there since the fire. Exactly. The speaker went silent. Jungkook looked at Jimin. We're going there. Jimin nodded. Together. Before they could leave, the piano suddenly played one final note by itself. A small compartment beneath the keys opened. Inside was a photograph. Jimin picked it up. It showed Jimin and Jungkook as they had been years earlier, standing in front of the theater. But there was something strange in the photograph. A third person stood behind them. Jimin stared at the face. His breath caught. No! Jungkook looked over his shoulder. Who is that? Jimin couldn't speak. The person in the photograph was someone Jungkook had known his entire life. Someone Jimin had trusted. Someone who had been beside them throughout the entire investigation. Jungkook's expression changed when he recognized the face. That's Minyu. Jimin nodded slowly. He was there that night. Jungkook looked at the photograph again. Then he lied. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Maybe. Jungkook folded the photograph carefully. We need to find out why. They left the red room and returned to the abandoned station. Dawn was breaking over the city when they stepped outside. The storm had finally passed, leaving the streets glistening under pale morning light. Jungkook walked beside Jimin in silence. After several minutes, Jimin spoke. Are you angry? Jungkook looked at him. At you, Jimin nodded. No, even after everything. I'm angry at the people who made you think you had to suffer alone. Jimin's eyes softened. Jungkook, but I am afraid. Of what? Jungkook looked toward the horizon. That when we finally remember everything, we'll discover that our lives were built around a lie. Jimin squeezed his hand. Then we'll rebuild them. Jungkook looked at him. Together. Jimin smiled through his tears. Together. They reached the old apartment just after sunrise. The building stood untouched, its windows covered in dust and its walls marked by years of neglect. Jungkook unlocked the front door with an old key he had kept without knowing why. Inside, the smell of old wood and dust filled the air. Jimin followed him into the living room. Where did your father keep his things? Jungkook pointed toward a bookshelf. There. They searched through old books, drawers, and cabinets. Nothing. Then Jimin noticed a small scratch on the floor beneath the bookshelf. Jungkook! They moved the shelf. Hidden behind it was a narrow metal compartment. Jungkook opened it. Inside was a second silver key and a letter. He picked up the letter. The envelope had only one name written across it. Jimin. Jimin's hands began to shake. It's for me. Jungkook handed it to him. Jimin opened the envelope. Inside was a single page. He read the first line and immediately stopped breathing. If you are reading this, then Minyu has already betrayed you. Jimin looked up at Jungkook. Neither spoke. Then, from somewhere outside the apartment, they heard a car door slam. Jungkook moved toward the window. A black car was parked across the street. Someone stepped out. Jimin recognized him instantly. Minyu. Jungkook turned. How did he find us? Jimin folded the letter against his chest. Because he always knew where we would go. Jungkook looked at the black car. Minyu stood beneath the morning light, staring directly at their window. Then he slowly raised one hand and held up a photograph. Even from a distance, Jungkook could see what it showed. It was a picture of Jungkook and Jimin inside the red room. Jimin's face went pale. Minyu smiled. He knows. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Knows what? Jimin's voice trembled. Everything. Everything. Jimin's whisper barely left his lips before the apartment door exploded inward, the crack of splintering wood sending both Jimin and Jungkook backward. Jungkook instinctively grabbed Jimin and pulled him behind the wall as footsteps thundered through the hallway. Jimin, stay here. No, Jimin, I'm not letting you face this alone anymore. Jimin's voice shook, but his eyes were determined. Another crash came from the living room. Jungkook grabbed the letter from Jimin's hand and folded it into his jacket. Then stay close. They moved silently toward the kitchen. The old apartment was filled with shadows and dust, and every floorboard seemed to complain beneath their feet. Someone entered the living room. Jimin, Minyu called calmly. I know you're here. Jimin's breathing tightened. Jungkook raised a finger to his lips. They waited. Minyu's footsteps moved slowly across the floor. You should have listened 5 years ago. Jimin's eyes narrowed. Jungkook whispered, the back door. They slipped through the kitchen and ran down the narrow staircase. Behind them, Minyu shouted, You can't run from the truth. Jungkook and Jimin burst into the alley behind the building. Cold morning air struck their faces. They ran until the sound of footsteps disappeared. Only then did Jungkook stop. Are you hurt? Jimin shook his head. No, the letter. Jimin pulled it from his jacket. Jungkook looked at him. Read it. Jimin unfolded the page. His hands trembled as he began. Jimin, if you found this letter, then the plan failed. Minyu was never working for me. He was working for the people who wanted the agreement. Jimin stopped. Keep reading. He swallowed. He was the one who arranged the meeting at the theater. He knew Jungkook would follow you there. Jungkook's expression hardened. He planned the fire, Jimin continued. But he did not expect Jungkook to protect you. Jimin's voice cracked. The night of the fire, Jungkook made a choice that changed everything. He offered himself in exchange for your safety. Jungkook stared at Jimin. What does that mean? Jimin kept reading. Jungkook agreed to surrender the document if they promised to leave Jimin alive. Jungkook shook his head. I don't remember making that deal. Because they never kept their promise. Jimin looked at him. They attacked you anyway. The letter continued. Jimin, there is something else. The agreement wasn't about money, property, or business. It was about identity. Jungkook's brow furrowed. Identity? Jimin read the next sentence. The document proves that Jungkook was adopted under a false name. Silence. Jungkook stopped breathing. What? Jimin stared at the page. Your father wasn't your biological father. Jungkook looked away, stunned. No, Jungkook, no. He walked several steps away, shaking his head. My father raised me. I know. He loved me. I know. And why would he hide this? Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Because he was protecting you. Jungkook pressed his hands against his face. From whom? Jimin read the final paragraph. Your biological family was connected to the people who wanted the agreement. Jungkook lowered his hands. Who are they? Jimin looked at the bottom of the letter. His face changed. There's a name. Whose? Jimin whispered. Your mother's. Jungkook stared at him. My mother. It says she was alive when your father took you away. That's impossible. The letter says she disappeared after the adoption. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. I was told she died. Jimin stepped closer. Maybe she didn't. Jungkook looked at him. Maybe she's still alive. Jimin nodded slowly. And maybe she knows why everyone has been trying to keep you from remembering. They stood in silence as the morning city began waking around them. Cars passed at the end of the alley. A bakery nearby released the warm smell of bread into the cold air. The ordinary world continued as if nothing had happened, while Jungkook's entire understanding of his life had just cracked open. We need to find her, Jungkook said. Yes, before Minyu does. Jimin looked toward the street. He may already know where she is. Jungkook took Jimin's hand. Then we move first. They returned to the old apartment through a side entrance after making sure Minyu was gone. The place was empty, but something had changed. A drawer in the bedroom was open. Jimin noticed immediately. Someone searched this room. Jungkook walked toward the desk. He was looking for something. Jimin remembered the letter. Maybe the second key. Jungkook checked his jacket. Still here. Jimin looked around. Then what did he take? A faint metallic sound came from beneath the bed. Jungkook crouched and reached underneath. His fingers touched a small wooden box. He pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a collection of old photographs and a cassette labeled with a single date. Jimin stared at it. That's the day before the fire. Jungkook inserted the cassette into an old player. Static filled the room, then a woman's voice emerged. Jungkook froze. He knew that voice. He had heard it in childhood recordings. Jungkook! Jimin looked at him. Tears had already filled his eyes. That's my mother. The recording continued. If you are hearing this, then I couldn't come back for you. Jungkook covered his mouth. I'm sorry, the woman said. I wanted to protect you, but I made a mistake. Her voice trembled. Your father believed the agreement could keep you safe. He was wrong. Static interrupted the recording, then she spoke again. There is someone you must trust. His name is Jimin. Jimin's eyes widened. Jungkook looked at him. She knew you. I didn't know her, but she knew you. The recording continued. Jimin, if you're listening, I'm sorry for asking you to carry this burden. You are the only person I trust to protect my son. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. She asked me. Jungkook whispered. She trusted you. Jimin nodded. That's why I couldn't abandon you. The recording ended. Jungkook sat silently for several seconds, then he noticed a photograph inside the wooden box. It showed his mother standing beside a man. Jimin leaned closer. That's Minyu. Jungkook stared. He knew my mother. Jimin's expression hardened. And she knew him. Suddenly the cassette player clicked again. A second recording began. This time the woman's voice was quieter. If Minyu ever tells you he wants to help, don't believe him. Jungkook's face went cold. Why? Her voice answered the question before they could ask. Because Minyu was the person who betrayed us. The recording stopped. Jimin slowly turned toward Jungkook. Now we know, Jungkook nodded. We know enough to confront him. Not yet. Why? Jimin held up the letter. Because your mother left one more clue. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten address. Jungkook read it twice. This is a coastal town. Yes. What is there? Jimin looked at him. A house. Whose? Jimin swallowed. Your mother's. They left the city that afternoon. The road stretched toward the coast, surrounded by mountains and thick forests. Jimin sat beside Jungkook in silence, watching the scenery pass. After several hours, Jungkook spoke. Are you afraid? Yes. Of finding her. Of what she'll tell us. Jungkook nodded. Me too. Jimin looked at him. If she tells you something you don't want to hear, I'll still want to hear it. Jimin smiled faintly. You've changed. You changed me. How? You taught me that loving someone isn't about protecting them from every painful truth. Jimin looked down. Then what is it? Jungkook reached across the center console and held his hand, standing beside them while they face it. Jimin squeezed his fingers. As the sun began to set, they finally reached the coastal town. The address led them to a small house overlooking the sea. The paint was faded. The garden was overgrown, yet the front door was unlocked. Jimin stopped at the gate. Someone has been here recently. Jungkook looked at the footprints in the wet soil. You're right. They entered carefully. The house smelled faintly of lavender and old books. On the living room table sat a cup of tea that was still warm. Jungkook stared at it. Someone is here. Jimin nodded. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Both men looked toward the staircase. Hello, Jungkook called. No answer. They climbed slowly. At the end of the hallway was a bedroom. The door stood slightly open. Jungkook pushed it gently. Inside was a woman standing beside the window. She slowly turned around. Jungkook stopped breathing. Jimin's hand tightened around his. The woman looked at Jungkook with tears already streaming down her face. My son. Jungkook couldn't move. The woman stepped forward. Jungkook. His eyes filled with tears. Mom, she nodded. I'm sorry it took me this long. Jimin stood behind Jungkook, stunned. The woman looked past him and immediately recognized Jimin. Her expression became frightened. You brought him here. Jimin frowned. You know me? She shook her head. No. Then she whispered the words that made Jimin's blood run cold. But I know what Jimin did 5 years ago. But I know what Jimin did 5 years ago. The woman's words struck Jimin harder than the storm outside, and Jungkook immediately turned toward him. What did Jimin do? The woman didn't answer. She stared at Jimin with an expression that contained grief, fear, and something dangerously close to regret. Jimin stood completely still. I think you should tell him, she whispered. Jimin's face went pale. Tell him what? You know. Jungkook looked between them. Jimin. Jimin opened his mouth, but no words came. The woman stepped toward them. 5 years ago, Jimin made a choice that saved Jungkook's life. Jungkook frowned. Then why does everyone speak about it like it was something terrible? The woman looked at him sadly. Because saving you came with a price. Jimin lowered his eyes. I never wanted you to know. Jungkook stepped closer. You don't get to decide that anymore. Jimin swallowed. I know. The woman moved toward a small cabinet and removed an old envelope. Your father left this for you. She handed it to Jungkook. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a photograph of a younger Jungkook standing beside Jimin. On the back was written, when the truth returns, ask Jimin what he gave up. Jungkook looked up. What did you give up? Jimin closed his eyes. Everything. Be specific. Jimin's voice trembled. My future. Jungkook stared at him. What does that mean? The woman answered softly. Jimin signed an agreement. Jungkook turned toward her. What agreement? A confidentiality agreement. Jimin nodded. I agreed never to reveal your mother's location, never to tell you about your adoption, and never to expose the people involved. In exchange for what? Jimin looked directly at Jungkook. Your safety. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. And you kept it secret all these years. Yes. Why didn't you tell me when I was older? Because the agreement didn't end when you turned 18. Then when? Jimin looked away. It ended when the people who threatened us were gone. Jungkook's expression hardened. And they're still alive. Yes. The woman stepped closer. That's why Minyu has been searching for you. Jungkook clenched his fists. Why does Minyu care about me? Because he knows what your mother knows. What does she know? The woman looked at Jimin. Tell him. Jimin took a slow breath. Your biological family was involved in a financial network that was being investigated. Jungkook's brow furrowed. Criminal, yes, and my father took me away, to protect you. And my mother. She tried to expose them. Jungkook stared at the woman. That's why you disappeared. She nodded. I went into hiding. Why didn't you take me? Tears rolled down her cheeks. Because they threatened to kill you if I did. Jungkook looked away, struggling to breathe. Jimin stood beside him but didn't touch him. He knew this wasn't his moment to speak. The woman continued. Your father promised he would keep you safe. I believed him. Until the theater. Until the theater. Jungkook's voice cracked. What happened there? The woman looked at Jimin. Jimin found out about the agreement. How? Jimin answered. Your father told me. Jungkook looked at him. Why would he tell you? Because he knew he might not survive. The woman nodded. Your father trusted Jimin because Jimin had already protected you once. Jungkook looked confused. Before the fire? Yes. Jimin's expression tightened. There was an incident months before the theater. Jungkook stared at him. What incident? You were being followed. And you stopped them. I tried. What happened? Jimin hesitated. Someone attacked me instead. Jungkook's face changed. You were hurt because of me. Jimin gave a faint smile. I'd do it again. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. Why? Jimin looked directly at him. Because I loved you before I knew what loving you would cost. Silence filled the room. Woman lowered her gaze, giving them a moment. Jungkook stepped closer to Jimin. You loved me all this time. Jimin nodded. Yes. And you thought I would leave if I knew. I thought you deserved a normal life. Jungkook shook his head. You were my normal life. Jimin's tears fell. Jungkook reached for his hand. The woman's voice interrupted softly. There is still one thing you don't know. Jimin looked at her. What? The agreement wasn't the real reason Minyu betrayed us. Jungkook turned. Then what was? She opened another drawer and removed a small black notebook. This. Jimin stared at it. The original record. Jungkook took it. Inside were names, dates, payments, and meetings. At the center of the notebook was a single page marked with red ink. Jimin leaned closer. His face changed. This can't be. Jungkook looked at him. What? Jimin pointed to a name. That's the person who ordered the theater fire. Jungkook read the name. His expression became blank. No. The woman whispered, I tried to warn you. Jungkook shook his head. This is impossible. Jimin looked at him. Who is it? Jungkook couldn't speak. Jimin took the notebook and read the name himself. His stomach dropped. The person behind the fire wasn't Minyu. It wasn't Jungkook's father. It wasn't anyone they had suspected. It was someone who had remained close to Jungkook for years. Someone who had comforted him after the fire. Someone who had helped him rebuild his life. Someone Jimin had trusted without question. Jungkook whispered the name. My uncle. Jimin's eyes widened. Your uncle. The woman nodded. He wanted control of everything your family owned. Jungkook looked sick. He knew about the adoption. Yes. He knew my mother was alive. Yes. And he knew about Jimin. The woman nodded. He knew Jimin was the only person capable of exposing him. Jungkook turned toward Jimin. That's why you were targeted. Jimin nodded slowly. Yes, not because you knew about me. Because I knew about him. The room suddenly felt too small. Jungkook looked at the notebook again. Where is my uncle now? Woman hesitated. Closer than you think. A loud crash came from downstairs. Everyone froze. Jimin immediately stepped in front of Jungkook. Stay behind me. The woman whispered, he's here. Jungkook looked toward the staircase. Who? Your uncle. Footsteps began climbing slowly. Jimin's heart pounded. Jungkook reached for his hand. No more running. Jimin nodded. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom. The door opened. A familiar man stood there. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. Uncle. The man smiled. It's been a long time, Jungkook. Jimin's body went rigid. He recognized the expression immediately. It was the same expression from the photograph in the underground room. The same person who had been standing behind them 5 years ago. The same person who had watched the fire begin. Jungkook stepped forward. You ordered the fire. His uncle's smile faded. You remember. Jimin moved closer to Jungkook. Don't. His uncle looked at Jimin. Still protecting him. Jimin's voice was steady. Always. The man laughed softly. Then perhaps it's time you finally told him the truth about what happened after the fire. Jimin's face went pale. Jungkook looked at him. What happened after the fire? Jimin said nothing. His uncle smiled. Ask Jimin why he disappeared for 6 months. Jungkook's eyes widened. He turned toward Jimin. 6 months. Jimin closed his eyes. Jungkook, you told me you left because you were afraid. I was. That's not the whole reason. Jimin's silence answered him. His uncle stepped closer. Tell him where you really went. Jimin's hands began to shake. I went to them. Jungkook's voice dropped. To whom? Jimin looked at him through tear-filled eyes. To the people who wanted you. Why? Jimin swallowed hard. Because they gave me a choice. Jungkook's heart sank. What choice? Jimin whispered. They said they would let you live if I went with them. The room fell silent. Jungkook stared at Jimin, unable to speak. Jimin continued, his voice breaking. So I left with them. You sacrificed yourself. Jimin nodded. Yes. Jungkook stepped toward him. And for 6 months, Jimin looked down. I was their prisoner. The truth finally came out, and with it came years of pain that Jimin had buried so deeply he had almost convinced himself it never happened. Jungkook reached for Jimin's face, his hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jimin closed his eyes. "'Cause I didn't want the person you loved to become the person you pitied." Jungkook pulled him into his arms. Jimin broke down against his shoulder. "I don't pity you," Jungkook whispered. "I love you." Jimin held him tighter. Across the room, the uncle watched them with an unreadable expression. Then he slowly reached into his coat. Jimin noticed first. "Jungkook, move!" A sharp metallic click filled the room. The woman screamed. Jimin pushed Jungkook aside as the object in the man's hand came into view. But instead of attacking them, the uncle placed a small recorder on the floor. "Listen," he said, "because what you're about to hear will change everything you think you know about Jimin." He pressed the button. A recording began. It was Jimin's voice from 5 years earlier. "Jungkook can never know that I was the one who started the fire." Jimin's blood turned cold. Jungkook slowly turned toward him. "Jimin!" Jimin stared at the recorder in horror. "That's not true." The recording continued. "If he remembers what I did, he'll never forgive me." Jungkook's face went completely still. Jimin whispered, "I don't remember saying that." The recording played one final sentence. "I started the fire to save Jungkook." "I started the fire to save Jungkook." The sentence echoed through the bedroom, leaving everyone frozen. Jungkook stared at Jimin, his face pale, while Jimin stood completely still as though the recording had reached into the deepest part of his memory and torn something open. "I don't remember saying that," Jimin whispered. His uncle smiled coldly. "You don't have to remember, you only have to admit what you did." Jungkook turned toward Jimin. "Did you start the fire?" Jimin's eyes filled with tears. "Jungkook, I swear I never wanted anyone hurt." "That's not what I asked." Jimin closed his eyes. Then memories began returning, not as a single clear image, but as fragments crashing together. The theater, the red door, his father's frightened expression, Minyu locking the corridor, Jungkook shouting his name, and finally Jimin holding a small container of fuel near the old curtains. Jimin gasped. "I did." Jungkook's eyes widened. "You started it." Jimin nodded, tears falling freely. "Yes." Room became painfully quiet. "Why?" Jungkook asked. Jimin looked at him. "Because your uncle had locked the evidence inside the theater. He was going to destroy it and kill anyone who knew about it. I realized the only way to force everyone outside was to start a controlled fire." "Controlled?" Jungkook whispered. "I thought I could stop it before it reached the main hall." Jimin's voice broke. "But I was wrong." His uncle laughed. "You nearly killed him." Jimin shook his head. "I would never." "But you did." Jungkook stepped closer. "What happened after that?" Jimin looked down. "The fire spread faster than I expected. Your father found us. He got you out, but then he went back for the evidence." Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. "And he never came back." Jimin nodded. "I blamed myself. You should have told me. I was terrified. Of me. Of losing you." Jungkook stared at him for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, "Did you ever regret saving me?" Jimin immediately shook his head. "Never." Jungkook's tears finally fell. "Even if it cost you 6 months of your life?" "Yes." "Even if it meant I hated you for years?" "Yes." "Even if I never forgave you?" Jimin smiled through his tears. "I would still choose you." Jungkook stepped forward and embraced him. Jimin collapsed against Jungkook's shoulder, crying harder than he had allowed himself to cry in years. "I'm sorry," Jimin whispered. "I know. I'm so sorry." "I know." Jungkook held him tighter. "But you don't have to disappear anymore." Behind them, Jimin's uncle quietly turned toward the door. Jungkook noticed. "You're not leaving." The man stopped. "What are you going to do?" Jungkook looked at the notebook in his hand. "Tell the truth." His uncle's expression hardened. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "Maybe not." Jungkook looked at Jimin. "But I know who I'm dealing with." The woman stepped forward and took the notebook from Jungkook. "I kept copies." The uncle's face changed. "You wouldn't." "I already did." She held up her phone. "Every document has been sent to the authorities." For the first time, fear appeared in the man's eyes. He turned toward the door, but footsteps sounded downstairs. Several voices approached. The authorities had arrived. Minyu's betrayal, the forged documents, the threats, the theater fire, and the years of manipulation would finally be investigated. Jimin watched his uncle being escorted away. He didn't feel victorious. He only felt tired. When the house finally became quiet again, Jungkook found Jimin sitting alone on the porch overlooking the sea. The night was calm. Moonlight stretched across the water and the salty breeze carried the sound of distant waves. Jungkook sat beside him. "Are you okay?" Jimin gave a faint smile. "I don't know. That's okay. I spent years thinking that if you ever learned the truth, you'd hate me." "I don't." Jimin looked at him. "Why?" Jungkook took his hand. Because I finally understand something. What? You weren't hiding the truth because you didn't trust me. Jimin's eyes softened. Then why? Because you loved me badly. Jimin blinked. Badly? Jungkook smiled sadly. You thought love meant carrying every pain alone so I wouldn't have to feel it. Jimin looked down. Maybe. And I thought love meant never letting you carry anything without me. Jimin smiled. Maybe we're both learning. They sat quietly for several minutes. Then Jungkook reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver key. He placed it in Jimin's palm. Keep it. Jimin looked surprised. Why? Because it's part of our story. Jimin closed his fingers around it. I thought you wanted to get rid of everything connected to the past. Not everything. Jungkook looked toward the sea. Some memories hurt. But they're still ours. Jimin leaned his head against Jungkook's shoulder. Do you remember everything now? Jungkook thought for a moment. Not everything. Does that bother you? A little. I'm sorry. Jungkook smiled. There you go apologizing again. Jimin laughed softly for the first time in days. I can't help it. Then I'll remind you. Of what? Jungkook turned toward him. That you're allowed to live now. Jimin's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were warm rather than broken. And you? Me. Are you allowed to live too? Jungkook smiled. Only if you stay. Jimin looked at him for several seconds. I'm staying. Months later, the old theater was reopened as an arts center. The red door remained, but behind it there was no longer a secret room. The photographs had been archived. The files had been handed over. The truth about Jungkook's family had finally come into the light, and his mother began rebuilding the relationship they had lost. Minyu faced the consequences of his betrayal. Jimin never forgot the fire, but he stopped allowing it to define him. He began writing music again, this time without hiding the songs inside locked rooms. One evening, Jungkook found Jimin sitting at the piano in the renovated theater. What are you playing? Jungkook asked. Jimin smiled. A new song. What's it called? Jimin looked at him. The Promise. Jungkook sat beside him. Didn't you already write that? That was the old version. What's different? Jimin placed his fingers on the keys. The old song was about protecting you. He played the first gentle notes. This one is about choosing you. Jungkook smiled. That's better. Jimin looked at him. I spent years believing secrets could protect the people I loved. And now I know the truth can hurt. Jimin paused. But being honest gives people a chance to heal. Jungkook reached for his hand, and we healed. Jimin squeezed his fingers. Together. The music continued through the quiet theater. Outside, rain began falling softly against the windows, almost like the storm from that night years ago. But this time, neither of them was afraid. Jimin no longer needed to hide behind silence. Jungkook no longer needed to chase answers through darkness. The secret that had once threatened to destroy them had finally become the truth that set them free. And when Jungkook asked Jimin one final question, if you could go back to that night, would you do anything differently? Jimin looked at him for a long moment before smiling. I would tell you the truth sooner. Jungkook smiled back. And the fire? Jimin's eyes became distant for a second. I would still save you. Jungkook gently touched Jimin's hand. Then I guess that's the secret I can forgive. Jimin rested his head against Jungkook's shoulder as the final notes filled the theater. For years, their story had been built around locked doors, missing memories, hidden photographs, and words left unsaid. But in the end, the greatest secret had never been the fire, the agreement, or the people who betrayed them. It had been the simple truth neither of them had been brave enough to say until everything else was exposed. They had never stopped choosing each other. And this time, they didn't have to hide it.